Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here, and today we find ourselves in the popular world of Sordain, where you'll journey through the realm to gather resources, build fleets, make discoveries, and wage epic battles for the control of the lost nation Aldarra. Aldarra is a strategy board game of fierce fantasy conflict and awe-inspiring airship designs in which 3 to 4 players control opposing fleets on a journey of exploration and conquest. Now it takes 90 to 180 minutes to play, is for ages 13 and up, and is published by Arcane Minis. Now it's on Kickstarter right now, so I'm going to show you how the game works, and I'll see you on the other side. This is a Kickstarter preview, and all the art and components you see here are prototypes. To see all the most up-to-date art and components, check the Kickstarter link in the description of this video. You're trying to have the most victory points. Once any player gets above 20, towards the end of that round you'll look to see who has the most points for the win. Now each player will have its own faction, with its own abilities, certain starting discoveries, and you'll have your own units on the board. But to get to those 20 points, there's many ways to do it, like at certain times you'll be able to turn in coins. 10 coins for a point, 20 coins for 3 points, or crystals that you get, 3 crystals for a point, or 5 crystals for 3 points. Over the course of the game, you'll be battling other players' units, and if you're the attacker and win the battle, you get a point that way. Over the course of the game, you might be exploring certain territories with your units, and when exploring, you might find things like a looted treasury to roll dice and get coins, but some of these cards also allow you to do certain things like sacrificing some of your own units in order to get points. And you'll have secondary objective cards that will get you points, 1 point for each of these, if you have, like for example, 4 of those explore cards in your hand, or win a combat against a player with more points than you. So those are the different ways to get points. So what are all these crystals and money and territories about? Let's dive a little deeper. Now the board is made up of these individual tiles, and there's a certain amount of different types of territories depending on the amount of players. Here's a 4-player game, and even once you have those tiles, it's randomly placed, and in this case we have a 4-player game. Now, through some strategic decisions, even during setup, each player is going to get their own stronghold, which essentially is their territory. They'll start with some units like frigates and engineers. They'll also be able to strategically place an outpost and a frigate and an engineer of their type. And notice that the miniatures, even though they're the same types between players, they look very different. Now, there are crystal depots, a certain amount depending on the amount of players, and each round a crystal will come out to each of those. But also, depending on a roll of a couple of dice, some more will be placed. Depending on turn order, certain players will be able to place them, and there's certain placement rules, but crystals are going to be coming out around the territories at the beginning of each round. Now each round of play goes through 3 main phases: preparation phase, expansion phase, and management phase. In the preparation phase, you're going to be setting turn order and spawning those crystals that I just mentioned. Now you don't actually set turn order in the first round, but in future rounds, you go with whoever has the least amount of points gets to decide where they are in turn order, and so on and so forth, so that the person who has the most points has the last pick of where they want to be in turn order. Then we're going to go to the expansion phase, and in turn order, you're going to do 3 turns each, because you actually have 3 orders. Now the order tokens in the final game will look like these shapes here, but in this prototype I'm just using these specific tokens here to mark our orders. So you're going to place orders, you're going to do movement, combat, and then possibly explore. So let's talk about placing orders. So in placing an order token, you will place it on a territory. Now you can place it on a territory where you have some units, and then you can move any amount of your airships out of that specific place. Or you can place it into a spot, and then you can move any amount of airships into the spot that you're going to. So it's always moving from or to where you're putting your order token for right now. Now airships, there's 2 types. There's light and heavy, and you'll start with some light frigates and a heavy engineer. Now they can move in different ways. The lights can, because they're light, they can move further. They can move up to 3, and the engineers, because they're heavy, can only move up to 2. So in that case, I could move all 3 of these to right here because it's only 2 away. However, if there is an enemy unit in a spot and you must stop your movement in it like this. You could go around them if you wanted to, but enemy movements, ones that have enemies there, you can't go through them, you must stop. And there's also mountains. If you ever get to a mountain, you must stop as well. You also can't move through opponent strongholds either. Or maybe you did a collaboration of this. Maybe you sent 1, 2 to here, and maybe you sent these 2 into here because maybe you want to do combat moving through towards that crystal. Now I brought this next to these just to show you, this would normally be next to the blue player's board, but to show you that it's their frigate versus my frigate and engineer. Now each of these types of units have different abilities as well. Like, for example, if I had moved the frigates alone, they could have moved 4, for example. And these abilities are the same regardless of faction because they're the same types of unit. Now each of these do have an armor. Now the combat will go through different little phases. And the first time you're doing this combat, you're going to go to the light combat step first, where you could decide if I want to, if I had a bunch of light ships, I could decide to delay them and have them fight with the heavy. And you'll see why later is that you have to get through the entire armor of somebody in order to, destroy them. So if you give a better chance of doing that, putting it together with a heavy, you can delay. Otherwise, you're going to roll the dice based upon your lights. I have 1 light ship, so I'm just going to roll 1 green die, for example. But if I had 2 frigates there, I would have been using 2 green dice. So in this case, I rolled a 1, they rolled a 0 because they also got 1 die as well. Mine has a little star next to it, and these are exploding dice, and they only do this specific thing during combat, where it will essentially assign 1 damage, but because it has that on it, I would essentially be rolling it again, and so you could possibly hit it more than once. In this case, it was a 0, so I hit it for 1, they hit me for 0. Now damage is assigned simultaneously, so my 1 damage hits their armor. They only have an armor of 1. Since it matches up to their armor, this unit is destroyed. Now this unit, if it had done 1 to me, we both would have been destroyed. Now one of this faction's abilities is when you destroy an opponent unit in combat that we started, which we did, you take it hostage and we place it right here. Then at the start of the build step, which is a little bit later in the round, it's at the very end of the round, they can pay you 4 coins to take back all their units that you have hostage. So that's a cool little thing that this specific faction has. For each of your units destroyed, you'll receive a coin as salvage, and it helps keep you in the game even if you've had a brutal round. And remember, these coins are used to buy points, but also units, which we'll show you a little later. Now after the lights go, then you'll do heavy and buildings at the same time. Heavy obviously is the engineer. Building was if we happen to have been on the spot where we actually had one of our outposts that we placed at the beginning of the game on one of those tiles that you saw out there. So you would do that combat again for the heavies in the same sort of way. Now in this case, since all their units were gone, we wouldn't need to go to this whole heavy thing. But if you make it past a round of combat and there's still units left from both sides, for example, let's say we were still there, let's say neither of us killed each other, and we're at this point now. Now you could retreat. First the attacker gets to retreat, and then the defender chooses. And if you're retreating, you take your units and you'll move them to an adjacent spot that doesn't have any enemy units. And sometimes it might not be legal to retreat, but you could pull out if you wanted to. And if the attacker didn't, but the defender wanted to, they could as well. Now, if no units remain in the territory or all the units are just from one player, then that combat is over. Otherwise, you start another round of combat. For example, let's say we went by and none of us hit each other, we're still there, neither of us retreated, we're going to start another round of combat. If there are no units destroyed in the previous round of combat, at the beginning of the next round of combat, you'll roll a green escalation die. This is going to be added to everyone's hits this round. And so they tend to escalate as more and more rounds of combat go around, more and more times you're probably going to hit. But in our first example, we destroyed that frigate right off the bat. And if you're the attacker and you win a battle, you gain a point. But if the defender had won, they don't gain a point. Now there's some other cool things about this. Let's say we did defeat them. We took them hostage because of this ability. Now we started with improved thrusters. It's our starting discovery. And this says after winning combat that we initiated, which we just did, you can move any number of units from the territory that the combat was to a single adjacent unoccupied territory. So maybe we move them over here because we want to get closer to this crystal as well. Now we would remove our order token from the board. Now we'd put it off to the side of our board knowing that it's, we've had one order already this round. Then optionally, we can explore. Now we can explore any unexplored territory that we have a unit in. And for example, we'd get a card. And some of them you do right away. Like this says, roll a blue die and get a free engineer in this territory for every hit roll. That would be really cool. Or some of them say hold, and it tells you when to play it, like a smokescreen. Play at the start of combat to retreat immediately. So some of these you'll be doing different things right away, or sometimes there'll be a little strategy as to when to play them. But you'll also place an explored token there, so no one else can explore in that territory. Now turn order is really important in this game because we just placed our first order and went through this. Well, the next player in turn order is going to do their first order, and so on and so forth till it gets back to us. We'll do a second order, everybody else will do a second order, we'll do a third order. So everyone's going to do 3 turns in turn order. Then we're going to go to the management phase. The first step of management phase is the mine. First of all, everyone, because of their stronghold, will get 10 coins. Then players will get a certain amount of coins depending on some of the territories they're on. Number 1, the copper one, you'll get 1 coin. Silver, they'll get 2, and this player's going to get 3 for being on the gold territory. You'll also be able to collect all crystals and territories that you have units. Because at this point in time, this is when you can spend those coins or crystals to get a certain amount of points as shown on the board. Then we're going to check the win condition. This is the only time you check. Now let's pretend all of these people were past 20. If it gets to 20 or higher, even one player, the game ends. Whoever has the most points at that point is the winner. And if it was tied, earlier in turn order would be the winner. Now, some of the game isn't over. You go to draw secondary objectives. I showed you what these are like at the beginning of the game. Like I have this one, have 4 Explorer cards in my hand. We can get a point for that. Now, at this point in time, you have 2 choices. You can either draw 1 from the deck, or you can discard a certain amount of these from your hand and draw that many from the deck. Another cool ability of this faction, when drawing those secret objective cards, we can draw 2 and keep 1 instead. Then you're going to discover. There's a certain amount of cards that get put up, 1 plus the amount of players, so 5 here for a 4-player game. And in turn order, players are going to be able to draft these and give you an ongoing ability. And they do all sorts of things. Feel free to pause this and read all these. But one thing I want to point out is some of these allow you to upgrade units, because we're going to be talking about units here in a little bit. Then in turn order, players are going to build units and or buildings. So let's look at some of these other units and buildings from the left to right. As you can see, we could build a destroyer, which is a light airship. We have the humongous dreadnought, which of course is a heavy airship. We then have another heavy airship, which is the cruiser. And then we have the fortress, which is a building. So let's talk a little bit more about these other units. Now, each of these have a cost. For example, 4 coins, 8 coins in a crystal, 5 coins in a crystal, and so on. Now you can build airships at your buildings. One of them is your stronghold. You can have up to 5 there. You can have up to 2 engineers at each of the outposts. Outposts is you get to start the game strategically by placing one of those. Now to build the fortress, it costs 1 outpost and 1 crystal. Essentially you're upgrading one of those outposts and placing a fortress there. And you can have 2 airships at each fortress. Now these different units do all sorts of different things, like reducing the armor of opposing buildings by 2 if the engineer is present. Or the destroyer, basically ones that are hanging around adjacent can join combat. Or the dreadnought, that if it's damaged and it's going to be destroyed, they roll a blue die and assign them much damage before it's removed. For the fortress, it allows you to get extra attack with a pink die, and you can build up to 2 units where this territory is. And with the outpost, you can build up to 2 engineers in this territory. And the cruiser allows you to, in each of the combats, decide that they must be targeted before any other ships, or cruisers cannot be targeted while you have any other units present. By the way, earlier I talked about discoveries, and sometimes you might have an upgrade. Each of these has another side that once it's upgraded, we can look at this. This says a 3 and a 1, but now it's getting a 3, a 1, and a 1 of a different die there. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is a Kickstarter preview and everything you've seen in this video are prototypes. However, here are some newer images of the unit cards that I've been showing you. And as you can see, for this most up-to-date artwork is gorgeous. And here are a few others from some of the other factions. Now, we already talked about a lot of the different territories and how they work differently. Like you can mine the copper, silver, and gold as we showed you for the different amount of coins. You must stop when you get to mountains. The crystal deposits will be getting crystals each round. Now the ancient ruins, if you're there and you explore, you get to draw 2 cards and resolve both in any order. Now in the forest, you end up mining for a coin, and outpost costs 1 coin less for each forest that you control. And if you're in the jet stream entry point, you get a +1 movement to all airships that start their movement there. That's pretty much in a nutshell how you play. Again, once someone gets 20 points, whoever has the most at that check win condition step in the management phase is the winner. Well, there you have Aldarra. And as I showed in the overview, it's a race to 20 points that you'll gain from winning battles, exploring, completing objectives, and cashing in coins and crystals. Now, if you'd like to see all the most up-to-date art and components and the different pledge levels that are available to you, you can click the link below me right in the description of this video. It'll take you directly to the Kickstarter project page, and I'm sure that Arcane Minis would love your support.